The world is watching the Strait of Hormuz. It's a narrow stretch of water, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. But every day, millions of barrels of oil and vast volumes of liquefied natural gas pass through. Today, that flow is in jeopardy. The strait is partially blocked, the result of a tense and escalating conflict involving Iran, and the consequences are rippling outward, touching the energy markets, global trade, and the intricate web of international diplomacy. Why does this matter so much? The Strait of Hormuz isn't just another shipping route. About a fifth of the world's oil supply moves through these waters. When passage is threatened, it's not just a regional crisis, it's a global one. Prices spike, supply chains shudder, and every country that relies on the global market feels the strain. In a world where market efficiency is king, the stakes couldn't be higher. In the last week, Iran has declared a new system for managing traffic in the strait. This follows a period of open hostilities and military tension. At the same time, a temporary ceasefire has been brokered. The United States and its allies have paused military operations, choosing diplomacy over escalation for now. Negotiations are ongoing, with the world's major powers leaning in, each with its own interests and calculus. China has stepped in, holding high-level talks with Iran. Beijing is urging Tehran to fully reopen the strait, warning of the dangers that renewed conflict would bring. Meanwhile, the United States is pressing China to use its influence in Tehran. The logic is simple. China is Iran's most important trading partner, and its clout could be decisive in restoring the smooth flow of goods and energy. This diplomatic moment is a crossroads. One path leads to normalization, the reopening of sea lanes, and the restoration of market efficiency. The other risks escalation, higher energy costs, and a potential shock to the global economy. The world waits, watching the negotiations, knowing that the outcome will shape not just regional politics, but the pulse of international commerce. To understand the gravity of this moment, it helps to step back. The Strait of Hormuz has always been a pressure point. For decades, its strategic importance has made it both a prize and a vulnerability. In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, the so-called tanker war saw attacks on oil shipments. The world learned then that a single incident in these waters could send energy markets reeling. Since then, the strait has remained a flashpoint. Every major power has a stake in keeping it open. The global economy is built on the assumption that oil, gas, and goods can move freely and predictably. Disruption, whether from war, piracy, or political brinksmanship, is a threat to that foundation. Market efficiency isn't just a business buzzword here. It's the underlying logic that ties together the interests of producers, consumers, shippers, and governments. The ability to move energy cheaply and reliably is what keeps economies humming. When that system is threatened, the costs ripple outward, through supply chains, into consumer prices, and ultimately into the political stability of countries dependent on affordable energy. Iran's new system for managing the strait is at its core a bid for leverage. By controlling the flow of goods, Iran can extract concessions, project power, and remind the world of its centrality to the regional order. But this is a risky game. The longer the partial blockade persists, the greater the risk of miscalculation, escalation, or even a broader conflict. China's involvement is telling. As the world's biggest importer of Middle Eastern oil, China has an overriding interest in stability. But it also has political capital with Iran that the West lacks. By urging Iran to reopen the strait, China is not just safeguarding its own energy needs, it's also positioning itself as a diplomatic intermediary. This is a classic case of economic incentives shaping state behavior. For China, the cost of instability outweighs any short-term political gain from confrontation. The United States, meanwhile, is playing a familiar role. By pressing China to lean on Iran, Washington is acknowledging the limits of its own leverage, but also betting that market incentives, China's need for cheap, reliable energy, will align with the broader international interest in open trade routes. This is geopolitical realism in action. National interests, shaped by economic imperatives, driving diplomatic strategy. Amid all this, Syria's stance is notable. By declaring strategic neutrality, Damascus is offering itself as a potential mediator. You're watching Today in Context, where we go beyond the headlines to explain the forces shaping the world around us. If this kind of analysis helps you make sense of the bigger picture, like the video and subscribe for more. This is both pragmatic and opportunistic. Syria gains international relevance by positioning itself between the major powers, but it also avoids the risks of direct involvement. In a region where alliances are often fluid, neutrality can be a valuable asset. The temporary ceasefire is a victory for diplomacy, but it is fragile. Any misstep, an accidental clash at sea, a breakdown in talks, or an escalation by a third party could undo the progress made. The world's major powers are keenly aware of this. That's why, for now, the emphasis is on negotiation, not confrontation. But the risks remain. If talks falter and the blockade persists or worsens, the consequences will be felt far beyond the Persian Gulf. Oil prices could spike, sending shockwaves through global markets. Import-dependent economies, especially in Asia and Europe, would be hardest hit. The cost of shipping could rise, and insurance premiums for vessels transiting the strait would likely soar. These are classic market inefficiencies, the very thing global commerce is designed to avoid. For Iran, prolonging the crisis carries its own dangers. While it may gain short-term leverage, it also risks alienating trading partners and inviting further isolation. For China, the prospect of a prolonged disruption threatens both its energy security and its emerging role as a global mediator. For the United States and its allies, the challenge is to keep the pressure on while avoiding a military escalation that could spiral out of control. This crisis is a vivid reminder of how interconnected the world has become. A narrow stretch of water halfway around the globe can roil markets in London, Tokyo, and New York. The logic of globalization is built on the assumption that goods flow freely, that markets allocate resources efficiently, and that political disputes are managed without disrupting the underlying system. Yet, as the situation in the Strait of Hormuz shows, this is not guaranteed. Infrastructure is vulnerable, chokepoints exist, and political interests can and do override economic logic. The task for diplomats and policymakers is to align those interests as much as possible to ensure that the incentives for cooperation outweigh the temptations of confrontation. Looking ahead, several scenarios are possible. The best case is a negotiated settlement, with Iran agreeing to reopen the strait fully in exchange for diplomatic or economic concessions. China, having played a key role in mediating the crisis, would burnish its credentials as a responsible global actor. The United States would claim a diplomatic victory, having avoided a costly military intervention. Markets would stabilize, and the flows of oil and gas would resume their normal rhythms. A more pessimistic scenario is a breakdown in talks, a resumption of hostilities, and a prolonged or even total blockade. In this case, the costs would be profound and immediate. Oil prices would surge, shipping would reroute at great expense, and the world would be reminded of just how fragile the system can be. The economic logic that usually prevails would be overwhelmed by the imperatives of security and survival. There is also the possibility of a muddling through, partial reopening, ongoing tensions, and a series of temporary fixes. This would create uncertainty, keeping markets on edge and raising the cost of doing business. Efficiency would suffer, and the world would pay a premium for risk. What is clear, though, is that the incentives for cooperation are strong. Every major actor, from Iran to China to the United States, has more to gain from a stable, efficient system than from chaos. The challenge is aligning those interests in the heat of crisis. This moment is a test of the international system. It's a test of whether global powers can manage their differences, keep critical infrastructure open, and preserve the efficiency that underpins prosperity. The Strait of Hormuz may be a small slice of ocean, but it's a bellwether for the health of the global order. In the end, the world's response to this crisis will hinge on the same factors that drive so much of modern politics and economics: interests, incentives, and the relentless logic of markets. Diplomacy will be measured not just in words, but in the movement of ships, the stability of prices, and the quiet, predictable flow of energy that keeps the lights on from Shanghai to San Francisco. The stakes are high, but so is the capacity for pragmatism. As the world watches the Strait of Hormuz, the hope is that realism, efficiency, and the shared interest in open markets will prevail over confrontation. The next few days and weeks will reveal whether that hope is justified, or whether the world must once again reckon with the costs of disruption at one of its most vital choke points. The stories that define tomorrow are already unfolding today. Subscribe to Today in Context for clear, grounded analysis of the events shaping our world, one story at a time.